The Enterprise gets a surprise. It was February 1st, 1942, 1:40 p.m. We were in the central Pacific Ocean, sailing waters near the Marshall Islands. We've been on the ship for at least 2 months. Deep down, I knew many of us were not going to make it. I know that the USS Enterprise was the supercarrier of its era, more fuel efficient, more agile, more deadly, but could it survive this clash with the Japanese? I'm Samuel Roberts, one of the 19-year-olds serving on the USS Enterprise's anti-aircraft division. This is the first time many of us have been on an aircraft carrier, and we were beyond surprised. There are 2,800 men on board for this voyage, more populated than some of the towns the others came from. You might say I'm lucky, having served on a state-of-the-art aircraft carrier for 2 years now, but don't. I get a front row seat of this rotten war. The average age aboard Enterprise is my age, 19. All of America's young men have arrived here to serve on this gigantic melting pot. The decks mostly echo with the accents of the Deep South and the Midwest, Texan ranch hands, and other guys from Pennsylvania, like me, Alabama, California, and everywhere in between. For many of us, life on the high seas takes some getting used to. You might mistake it for a city. Around 1:40 p.m., I thought I could make out 5 or so twin-engine Japanese bombers breaking out of the clouds and swooping towards us at low glide, 2 miles off the ship's starboard bow. My anti-aircraft guns greeted the invaders with a cloud of lead, but even with my guns banging away, the G4Ms were still determined to deliver their payload onto our flight deck. Just one hit could put this floating airfield out of commission. The Japanese aircraft opened their bomb doors and let the bombs loose. I closed my eyes and braced for the worst. This was it. I said my prayers until I heard what sounded like an anvil crashing into the water from 1,000 feet above. Luckily, all the bombs missed, but one was close enough to rock the edge of our ship. The shrapnel rains down on us, gravely injuring someone on the deck. I silently prayed for him to live. My prayer wasn't answered. With their payload dropped, the enemy planes left the area, except for one. Although our gunfire has left it wounded, the plane in the rear does a 180-degree left turn and buzzes back towards us. Our captain, George Murray, orders instant evasive action. We could hear him from the flight deck yelling to the man at the steering wheel on the bridge, "Full right rudder." As the ship attempted to swing hard to the right, the Japanese plane dips down to just a couple hundred feet above sea level, and this time I wasn't the only one praying. As the Japanese plane zeroes in on us, an aviation machinist, who we found out later was Bruno Gaido, ran across the flight deck, jumped into a parked airplane, got on one of the machine guns in the plane, then aimed and fired at the Japanese bomber. At the last possible moment, with Enterprise moving sideways, the suicidal enemy bomber charted a flight plan for maximum destruction. He banked sharply to the right on a collision course with us. As he crossed sideways onto Enterprise's flight deck, his right wing sheared off the tail section of Bruno's plane. Unhurt, he continued firing at the enemy plane as it skidded off the flight deck into the churning waters below. It's very clear Bruno's heroism has saved the day. His quick action spared us a devastating blow. Rear Admiral William F. Bull Halsey, the most fearless, disciplined, and toughest admiral in the Pacific, who just happened to be the commanding admiral of the ship, had watched the extraordinary event from Enterprise's bridge. He ordered that the sailor who shot the plane down be sent up to the bridge right away. The anecdote I heard was that Halsey asked Bruno his name and position, to which he responded, "Bruno Gaido, aviation machinist mate 3rd class." The admiral responded, saying, "You are now aviation machinist 1st class." For me and the rest of the crew, this was just another day on the job, one of the many close calls that we and our lucky E have faced since the war began. Enterprise is well equipped for battle with the Imperial Japanese. The question is, are we? None of the pilots here have ever shot in anger. so only God knows how they will respond when the Empire of the Sun delivers its well-wrapped attack. While Enterprise is the grand carrier of her era, and probably the entire Pacific Fleet, we won't be fighting alone. On the high seas, we're defended by destroyers and cruisers, scout planes, bombers, and fighter planes, and even by submarine. With the eyes and ears of the entire fleet, we could virtually remain undetected. That way we could sink ships before they even know we're there. Total warfare with Japan is imminent, and all of us know it. It's December 6th, 1941. We are roughly 300 miles from Pearl Harbor. We were due back on December 7th, but luckily, Mother Nature had other plans for us. A massive storm, which used up the remaining fuel of our destroyers, prompted a refueling session on the high, rough seas. However, this twist of fortune will keep us and the task force from the far worse fate awaiting the ships docked at Pearl Harbor. The next day, about 200 miles to the east, 353 Japanese warplanes are headed to Pearl Harbor for a date with infamy. It's now February 1st, 1942, and the days of training and patrolling are over. It's time to literally take the fight to the enemy, and our targets are the Wochi Islands in the Central Pacific, in the Marshall Islands chain. The objective is to deny Imperial Japan a base for a possible invasion of the Hawaiian Islands. USS Northampton begins the attack in the morning by firing at the island of Wochi 5 miles away. 100 miles west of Wochi, surveillance has revealed a heavy concentration of enemy vessels at the tiny Kwajalein Atoll. The plan is for our SBD fighter planes to strike the Kwajalein anchorage, while USS Northampton takes care of the island of Wochi. 5 miles to the north, a fellow Enterprise dive bomber pilot discovered a cluster of merchant ships and tankers in an inlet. He scored a well-timed hit on a tanker scrambling for the channel's mouth. As it sinks, the tanker blocks the other ships from escaping the lagoon, dooming all of them. The Marshall Islands raids were a huge success, and we returned to Pearl Harbor to a hero's welcome. People were standing and cheering, nurses were waving towels, some of the army people held their rifles up, and there was this one guy holding a mop and shaking it. Everyone was so elated that someone had whacked the enemy good and proper, and all the sailors on the Enterprise manned the flight deck by the hundreds, hollering twice in unison, "Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray!" We soon get yet another small taste of revenge on mid-April 1942. We could notice that the air had gotten chillier. We'd been operating in the steamy South Seas for weeks, and now the brisk weather made it obvious we were sailing north, but only the captain seemed to know why. Tensions are still climbing, for at any moment the calling sounds of the sea could be interrupted by the roar of a Japanese Zero fighter or a torpedo slamming into and detonating our hull. At roughly 6 o'clock on the morning of April 12th, we noticed a totally unexpected sight in the distance. Luckily, the surprise vessel was friendly, our sister carrier, the USS Hornet, but she's carrying mysterious cargo. There was something wrong with her silhouette. Her flight deck was covered with big, strange-looking aircraft, which weren't painted Navy colors. In fact, they didn't even look like naval aircraft. We finally figured out that the mysterious aircraft were B-25 bombers and had Army camouflage. The 16 Army B-25s were here to make a bombing run on the heart of Japan in the Doolittle Raid, which would attack Tokyo and its surrounding industrial centers. The objective was to take out factories and munitions plants and demoralize the enemy. After attacking Tokyo, they would continue on to land in friendly, remote Chinese territory. Since Hornet's normal defensive aircraft was stored below her decks to make room for the B-25s, we'll go along with her as a protection if she's attacked. Apparently, the plan was to launch the B-25s closer to Japanese homeland, but we had a stroke of bad luck. A vessel believed to be a fishing boat turned out to be a Japanese naval patrol boat. Before we could sink it in time, they sent a message to Japanese port authorities, which Pearl Harbor intercepted as warships. So, we were forced to launch farther, about 200 miles farther from the Japanese mainland, which means Colonel Jimmy Doolittle and his men might not have enough fuel to safely make it out of enemy territory and into Chinese territory. It's 8:20 a.m. on the cold, damp, and blustery morning of April 18th, 1942. As the B-25 bombers prepare for takeoff, I begin to realize the weather. High wind, high seas, carrier racing 30 knots, headwind, and too much more. However, the pilots have more to worry about than the weather. Carriers like Enterprise and Hornet were not even designed to launch B-25 planes this heavy, and this is the first time a B-25 has ever attempted to take off from a carrier in combat. And today, the planes were even heavier because of their payloads. Despite the danger and the odds, Colonel Doolittle is among the first to go. His plane struggles off the deck, for a moment falling into the water, but managing to stay airborne. 4 hours after launch, they finally reach Tokyo, and despite enemy flak, each plane drops 2,000 pounds of munitions into Japan's heart. They then turn toward the Chinese coast and their designated landing area, but as the last drops of fuel are used up from their tanks, most of Doolittle's aircrew had no choice but to bail out and perform a crash landing. 3 crewmen die in the process, and 8 are captured by the Japanese. Nonetheless, the psychological impact has truly been significant on both sides of the Pacific. It was an American morale booster for us, and it was a not-so morale booster for the Japanese. The first 6 months of World War II have been a great trial for me and the rest of the crew. In December of 1941, we were sailing the Pacific, unsure of what lay beyond the horizon. But now, we are all well on our way to becoming a battle-tested fighting machine. Tensions are no longer high, morale is higher. With this spirit, the war will be over quickly. I couldn't have been more wrong. We'll soon come face to face with the enemy again, and the course of this war will change forever in the massive and deadly battles to come. I hope you liked this video, and if you're a little bored, check out my YouTube channel. It's just my name, Riyaad Azad. And yeah, thanks for watching.